Thank you, Rosalie, for making that so seamless this time around. I really appreciate it. Some of us have been here before, some of us have not, but the intention for this meeting is that we are working together to develop ourselves professionally. I really believe that if each of us develops ourselves professionally as scholars in the field of transpersonal psychology, in other areas of mental health, in psychotherapy, all kinds of things in the field, through the field of transpersonal psychology, then we are, in fact, improving the field itself as well. So I thought that it would be a good idea to bring students together, not even just at Sofia. I'm really happy that we have this community here, but also any students from other schools have been invited in certain ways. Aleph Trust, CIS, any students that are interested in working together to develop ourselves professionally, I think is really a beautiful idea. And so this is also supported by the Association of Transpersonal Psychology. I work as a community outreach, in a community outreach team. So we work on the newsletters and things like this. And so this is sort of like a little bit of branching on that. They've supported me in doing this, and Sofia University obviously supporting here. So thanks everybody for showing up. Today we have a guest. We have Dr. Marilyn Schlitz. I've had a great opportunity to build a relationship with Marilyn, with Dr. Schlitz over the years, in different times at seminars, and just have had the opportunity to cultivate a really amazing relationship. She is also a part of my dissertation committee, so really honor her for that, for all that she gives back to students. She does a lot in just being willing to participate anywhere that students need support. And she's been that way since I first met her. I think I first met her at a town hall meeting, it was like a town hall meeting many years ago in her first year with Sofia. So really honored to have her here today. I'm going to pull up just a couple of questions that are going to guide our conversation today. But while I'm doing that, Marilyn, would you like to speak, introduce yourself or anything like that?
Well, thanks, Travis, for having me and for being such a facilitator of community. I think it's beautiful and appreciate it very much. What would you like me? Do you want me to give you a little of my history in terms of,
Yeah,
or would you like to wait till the questions come up?
that would be great. I have the questions here. So the kind of the guiding questions, and basically Marilyn and I had a little bit. She asked me what should she bring to the group, and I think her professional experience, her trajectory as from a student through a scholar, and being the professional that she is today, published multiple times, different opportunities that I've had the opportunity to also listen to her professional trajectory sort of story a few times, maybe a couple of times. And I think she has a lot of value to share there. I think you have a lot of value to share there. But here are the three guiding questions. Where does one begin in the field of transpersonal psychology? Maybe sort of ambiguous question. How does a scholar in this field find opportunities? Where does one search? I know that networking has been a really big piece in your journey, and I'm really inspired by networking at conferences, things like this. And then the third question is just to the community at large. What else would you want to explore about the professional journey in the field of transpersonal psychology? What other questions might you have to follow up with Dr. Schlitz? So anything, hi, Michelle. Anything that you would be willing to introduce us? Where did you start? Where was the beginning of your scholarly career? How did it progress?
Well, let's see. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, And my father was a tool and die maker, and my mom was basically a housewife at that point. I was the sixth child, and there was a 10-year gap between me and my next sister. And so I was in some ways kind of an only child, and in some ways, a misfit who was on the tail end of something. And they were a little bit tired, I think, of parenting by the time I came along. And so my upbringing, kind of on the streets of Detroit, and I'm actually teaching a course this quarter on the psychology of delinquency. And I feel like I certainly can relate to that first person in many ways. And, oftentimes in places I shouldn't have been with, people I shouldn't have been with. So that kind of defines my early years. I was fortunate. My parents were really into boating. And so every weekend we went out on their boat. And so that gave me an opportunity to be in nature. So part of the time I was in this really dense urban environment that was pretty riled up at the time. We ended up in the 60s having the riots, and it was a time when a lot of jobs were being lost and inflation was high, and it was just kind of a crazy period. And I remember as I was growing up really feeling some anger and some desire to see things be different, and yet being completely inept at being able to affect any change. And so I guess that's part of why I got in trouble all the time. But I was also in all honors classes during high school. And so I, on the one hand, hang out with the bad kids after school, and on the other hand, I go to all the honors classes, and I'm doing very well. And really got into kind of a bit of scholarship, the whole idea of how do you write, how do you organize your time, how do you create a compelling narrative. All of that was early. And so when I was 19, and I was just actually, I guess maybe I was 18, because I was just getting ready to go to college. And I applied for a couple of different places, and I got into both of the schools, University of Michigan and Wayne State University. And I ended up going to Wayne State because my father died, and I ended up needing to stay closer to my mom. And I waitressed, in a very fun restaurant in downtown Detroit. And so that's kind of what happened. And I made friends in all kinds of places. And anyway, so I kind of had a sense that maybe there was some path to scholarship for me, but I was still, completely caught up in my other world at the same time. So, met a couple of people who really helped me. One who, just thought I was brilliant and I should, whatever. And he was a professor at the medical school. And so I worked a little bit with him in terms of consciousness and mind and body. And he was really a very interesting guy who even though he was very much in the reductionist materialist world, was also super interested in things like mummies. And he used to talk to me a lot about how there may be a difference between the mind and the brain, and consciousness. And so he gave me a book one day called Psychic Exploration by Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut. And that book, along with the fact that the curriculum in my college, Monteith College at Wayne State University, was all about paradigm shifts. And we used Thomas Kuhn's book, Structure of Scientific Revolutions, as sort of the foundation of the 4 years of my college education, at Wayne State University. And so I really found this concept of paradigms and paradigm shifts to be liberating. So this kid from Detroit, wanting to make an impact, not feeling I had any opportunity for that. Kuhn's book came along and said, well, you're living in a paradigm and it's neither fixed nor absolute. Maybe something else is possible. And with that then came Edgar Mitchell's book on psychic exploration. And that book just charged me up. It was like my roadmap to the future. And I was really inspired by the fact that a group of serious academics from different fields were considering the possibilities of the untapped potentials of our mind and brain, and in particular psychical research. So ESP, psychokinesis, and the philosophy of mind and mind body and all that. So that really got me inspired, and I started doing little experiments with one of the psychology professors, and we were doing remote viewing. And remote viewing, is the ability, it's the intention to describe a distant location. And so he and I dabbled with that over the summer, and we had remarkable hits. It was really pretty astonishing, and so that gave me a sense of possibility. And then I ended up, the school I was in, Monteith College, got phased out. It was just too expensive, and it had too big a ratio of teacher to student, and so they let me take my last year anywhere I wanted to go. So I ended up going out to California. I had a group of those same friends that I knew from before, and they'd all moved to California. And so I went to LA and kind of lived in a commune sort of thing. I mean, I had my boyfriend, but we all pitched tents in it had been a courthouse originally. And so it was a pretty anarchistic environment. And yet I would find these little places where I could study. And sometimes that caused a lot of resentment on the part of my hippie friends. But anyway, I was kind of driven. So, and I will say there were numerous times in my path that, my friends wanted to go someplace else, and I was drawn to, my books. And so I ended up studying with this guy, Robert Morris, at the University of California in Irvine. And he was, one of the leaders in the field of parapsychology and the mind body piece. And anyway, so he helped me get into a summer internship programs at the Institute for Parapsychology in Durham, North Carolina. And I had gotten accepted into the LA Art School and the Institute for Parapsychology, and I so needed to get out of LA. So I jumped and I went to Durham, North Carolina, ended up spending 3 years there. It was a fabulous, fabulous time. And I was, a full-time researcher at a research foundation. And that was really interesting. I made $400 a month. My mother was shocked and appalled. And yet I was able to live cheaply. It was like $40 for a room in a house and that kind of thing. So anyway, that was all good. And then I started doing psychic healing research, and I got involved with an institute in Texas. And so I ended up moving eventually to Texas and worked at the Mind Science Foundation for 10 years and did a lot of research there, published a bunch of papers, and really created a research protocol that has now been replicated in labs all over the world. And William Broad was one of my closest colleagues, and he ended up, when we all got laid off, he ended up going out to the Institute for Transpersonal Psychology, and I ended up not being sure what I was going to do next. I hadn't so while I was working at Mind Science, I went to graduate school, and I did a master's at the University of Texas in San Antonio in social and behavioral sciences. And then I went and did a PhD in Austin, Texas, in social anthropology. And, meanwhile, kept working my day job, and, didn't really have a lot of social life. I lived a really great place in Texas. But when we all got laid off, I hadn't finished my dissertation yet, and my relationship was on the rocks. And it was like, what am I going to do next? And I think this is a great lesson for life. I was in Germany at a conference. I think conferences are great. Um, and I was drinking beer with some people. And a week later, I got a phone call from one of them. And I said something about, how's your beautiful wife? And he said, my beautiful wife thinks I should offer you a job. And I was like, okay. So he was the head of a cognitive sciences laboratory at a big think tank called Science Applications International Corporation. And he was the director of a CIA DIA program in psychic ability and remote viewing. So this is a pretty famous program, and I was the last person to be hired into it. So I did that, but it wasn't enough for me. I was like still nervous about leaving Texas, and I blah blah blah. And I knew about a fellowship at Stanford in psychical research, only they never gave it to anybody who was really interested in these kinds of things. They only gave it to skeptics and debunkers. So I took what I was doing in my dissertation, and I proposed that I would do a discourse analysis of controversial science, looking at truth construction in the skeptic proponent debate on parapsychology. And they loved it. They just loved it. It was such a weird thing, I'm at Stanford and they're all like, yeah, yeah. And I came from Detroit, it was a big deal for me. So anyway, I was at SAIC, I was at Stanford. I ended up, they lost their government contract about a year after, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I had been renewed at Stanford, but the amount they pay was pitiful. And that day I got a phone call from somebody I had met during this period, and he invited me to come be the research director at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And I hemmed and hawed. I have to say, I wasn't sure that's what I wanted to do. I was on a really nice, track at Stanford. If I wanted to jump off into mainstream academia, I certainly could have done that. But I decided to take a risk, and I went there, and I spent probably 25 years there. I was the research director, then I was VP for research and education, and then I became president, CEO. I now have a senior fellowship position there, and in a warm relationship with the organization. But it was time for me to leave. I just knew it. Most of the people I'd come in with had died, and I just didn't want to die there, to be really honest. It was like, I didn't want that to be my last job, So I didn't know what I was going to do. I took some time off. I made a film with Deepak Chopra called Death Makes Life Possible. Wrote a book at the same time. And then I was having some real personal issues with my son. And I was really struggling. I was struggling to be kind of independent, entrepreneurial, make a business out of all this stuff. And at the same time, needing to pay for treatment for my son who had gotten into some chemical dependency stuff. And a friend of mine said on the way back from giving a workshop, maybe you should get a job. And I was like, oh, well, there's an idea. And so I kind of targeted Stanford area, and I reached out to 5 friends, and I just, I met with them, had lunch, dinner, and finally I was with Jeffrey Martin at Sofia. And I said, I'm trying to reinvent my life and my career. And do you have any suggestions? And he said, well, as a matter of fact, I have a couple. And I was like, okay, that sounds good. And so within a week, I became the chair of the psychology program at Sofia. And I've been there ever since. And I have to say, I love the generativity of teaching and mentoring and learning. And so that's kind of my road. I have, a number of tributaries that branch off, and I'm happy to talk about them, but that's probably good enough for now.
That sounds awesome. That was an incredible path that we all got to listen to. For right now, does anybody have any questions or comments about all that was just shared from Marilyn? I have a couple of things myself. That there is at one point I took a bunch of notes, and at one point you said that maybe you felt more driven than your friends, but what was, and this kind of connects to that. In the beginning, you felt like you said an inept ability to foster change in the world. What was driving you? If at one point you felt like there was nothing that you could do, what became a driving factor for you early on?
I think getting out of Detroit was, as soon as I figured out I could, that became a goal,
Mhm.
because it wasn't really a good situation there. It was great. I mean, I will say that it was completely character building, but, I decided I wanted to be a revolutionary, and I wanted to help change the world. And that's what Thomas Kuhn gave to me. And that's what all those scholars doing psychical research gave to me. Institute of Noetic Sciences was an amazing place to be because I met so many people, like, wow. And, and really broadened from being interested in psychical research to the broader field.
Mhm.
I got invited several times during, my development to speak at the transpersonal conferences and things like that. So I guess I've always had you know, a dance with the transpersonal, but it wasn't really thought of as that. I used to talk about the noetic sciences when I was there. And, really, I think that these noetic experiences, these ineffable realizations are a big part of, what is transpersonal and what
Yeah.
is, self-actualizing. But, there's a telos in us. And I happen to have that acorn in me that wanted to, use scholarship and science as a vehicle for helping change the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what I think of as a transpersonal psychologist, these professional revolutionaries, like people that are really wanting to do things, but not in not without some sort of road, some sort of container that it goes. Otherwise, it kind of like it dissipates. It gets lost. So yeah, that's really awesome. Another question that I have is how did so you met William Broad at the Mind Science Foundation in Texas? How did that relationship come about? William Broad, if others don't know, or if you do know, he did work at Sofia University. He worked pretty well with Rosemary Anderson in creating these research methods book. Dr. Marilyn Schlitz, she is my methods person in my committee. All of that, all of that, all that history in creating research methods and stuff. You're an awesome fit for all of those things. How did that relationship come about with William Broad?
Well, it's a good lesson too. So I was kind of filled with a little hubris. Probably 1980, 81. I had published a couple of papers that were really kind of skyrocketed me to the top of that field. And I, was invited to be the keynote speaker at a conference in Iceland. And, I was young, and it was an interesting evolution and very quick. And so I had been doing psychic healing research, and one of the leading people in the world was William Broad at the Mind Science Foundation. So I figured, I'm this hotshot young person, and I should go work there. So I wrote to him, and he said, "Oh, well, I'm sorry, but we don't have any funds." And I said, "Okay, can I volunteer?" And he was like, "Great." So I ended up, I had, the beginnings of what turned into a very long-term relationship. And so it was easy for me to go to San Antonio and have a place to live. And so I went and volunteered for 3 months, which I strongly advocate. I mean, volunteering is a big thing. Um, and so I then went home back to Durham, North Carolina. And the next day I got a phone call from William Broad saying, "Oh, we found some money, and are you interested in a job?" And at that point, I wasn't. I was really still immersed in what I was doing at the Institute for Parapsychology and my really creative life in Durham, and my friendships and all of that was so fantastic. So he gave me, an extension, and it took me about 9 months to actually work my way to Texas. On a very rainy night in my little Toyota car, and filled to the brim with my belongings. And I ended up in San Antonio. And so it was a beautiful relationship I had with him and a man named Helmut Schmidt, who was also a very world famous parapsychologist at the time. And so every day I got to work with these guys and do remarkable things and publish up the wazoo. And so, it was really fun, really fun. And it was also just super career advancing. So that's a little bit of it.
So did they give you a lot of good guidance in terms of publishing at that time? I heard you say that that was a lot of where you began publishing, it sounded like.
No, I published my first paper in 1979 at a conference, and then there were proceedings from it.
Mhm.
And when I was at the Institute for Parapsychology, I really got a lot of great training. So not only was I learning all the things about research design and protocols and statistics, and I became pretty fluid with the quantitative as well as the qualitative.
Mhm.
Um, but we had journal groups, journal club kind of thing. And so twice a week we all met and we discussed scholarly articles that had recently been published. And so I had to present, at least once a week I was doing little presentations, and that starts to, sharpen one's chops.
Mhm.
And I was also going out and doing some teaching at community colleges, as a way to pick up a little extra money, and it gave me some experience. So yeah, I would say that was really the foundation for how I learned about public speaking, how I really got into the publication thing. I probably had 7 or 8 publications while I was there.
Mhm.
And then, it gets easier after a while, and you get invited to participate in things. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you find this field or your trajectory even sounds very entrepreneurial? Do you like that word? Does that word make sense?
I resonate with that, definitely. I'm very self-created. I'm multidisciplinary. I am not in any one box. I've been exposed to, world-class physicists who won Nobel Prizes, and I've been exposed to the most amazing, remarkable creative artists. And, all of that flows through me. So I do think the entrepreneurial spirit is that, push of self. And one of the things I was really good at is fundraising. And so if you want to create a project, you have to have the funding for it. And so that, that's a skill set as well. So one person I worked with described it as like I could take fairy dust and turn it into something that, became a book, so that's a skill I have.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so the takeaways for me are volunteer. If you have a place you really want to work, volunteer and show up every day, that kind of thing. And then I don't use the term networking particularly. I use friendship and relationship cultivation. And, along the way, I certainly had, I don't call it a Rolodex anymore, but I have a lot of contacts. I have a vast, network of contacts, but mostly I have some really great friends that I've now known over decades.
Mhm.
And I know that if ever I were stranded in a foreign country, I could call one of them, and I have done that actually. So it's a safety net to have those friendships in different fields and in different disciplines, and ultimately people who are going to have your back when you need it.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I mean that's what we were doing here with groups like this and at Sofia, building community, being able to be friends with one another, so that we can have that sort of Rolodex of people around. If I'm ever stuck in England, I'm gonna call Briani. Um, so I have more things that I would try or ask with Marilyn, but does anybody else? We're all here to be involved in this conversation. So um, anybody else? What we're our question 3 is, what does the community want to explore about the professional journey in transpersonal psychology? Do you have any ideas of where you would want to take your own personal professional journey? Maybe there's some kind of insights that Marilyn can offer.
Just turn off that mute button.
Just turn off
Hey,
that mute button. Yeah.
There we go.
I'll see if I can get on video. Hey guys, it's
Hey,
Amy. How are you?
Amy.
Good
Well,
to see you.
This is where I sit every day when I work 24/7 at Visa in my corporate America job. And I graduated a few weeks ago from the master's program. Yay. And I'm in my few weeks of just totally being lost without my network and like, wait, where are all my classes and my reading and my people? And we built a really nice, strong network. But I think right now, I'm just really feeling the urge to, I mean, I always tell people when they work at Visa, you can run a small country after, because you get exposure to all of the regions and, you know, everything global and everything business. So it's not all for naught. I'm very grateful for my experience, you know, being a keynote speaker and having to write executive briefs to get money to do things. But I'm really missing, I think for a while, I just thought, I'll just be the light at work. And I'm kind of over that. I'm ready to immerse myself and make less money if I have to, and just use my contributions for good. And I'm trying to figure out, you know, like what I realize I don't know a lot about what are the organizations kind of around that take folks that maybe have a certain level of work experience, but not publications or years in the transpersonal, you know, field. I found a few, and I love teaching. I started my career as teaching, but I found a few, and I'm less on the research side. I'm more on like the spiritual side, the energy healing, things like that side. And I've started a small business, and I have an office in a neighboring town, Burlingame, where I see clients and talk to them about heart activation, kind of like life coaching and things like that. So I'm kind of looking though for like, how do I make my day job more in the transpersonal field with some financial security, maybe part-time, so that I can do what I want to do, but also have some steadiness, because I don't feel it's smart to just jump ship to try to start a brand new business from the ground up on my own right now. Because I do have 2 kids I need to send to college. So it's like, I love everything you said, Marilyn, because it's like balancing the real and the obligations and responsibilities with how we're showing up to contribute. So I guess my question is, do you know organizations that do take like volunteers or have clubs like what you were talking about? I mean, I know Heart Math, but I'm kind of looking beyond, you know, beyond that, that are good feeders for like recent graduates.
Well, I think one thing to keep in mind is, you know, Travis used the word entrepreneurial, and it sounds like you have a strong entrepreneurial drive. And I think that's really important, because I don't think there are a lot of jobs for transpersonal. I think what you have to do is take the principles and the philosophy and the practices that you've learned, and then see how they fit. So, you know, I gave a talk, and that should have been recorded. Maybe Rosalie knows, but about, I guess a few of us, it was John Elfers and Robert Wood and I guess that's the talk I'm thinking of, where I looked at how transpersonal can be applied to different professions. And, you know, I'm in the MBA program right now. It was my COVID therapy, kind of like what you said, where are the classes, and, you know, I get that. So I think that transpersonal philosophy is very applicable in business, very applicable. And I think there's also a hunger for it. So finding ways in with your skill set, you know, if it was me, I might go to LinkedIn, or I might go to, I don't think Facebook is a very good place for this particularly, but I think LinkedIn could be. The guy who founded LinkedIn, I met him with Deepak, and that guy worshiped Deepak Chopra. I mean, he got down on his knees and thanked him for coming to give a lecture, which was a little over the top. But anyway, you know, that might be a place I would start if I was looking. You just take what those skills are and what do you have to offer, and then you look to see what they're looking for. And, you know, that could be the kind of place one could volunteer or do an internship or something. I'm not saying that's the only thing, but even in computer science, I think that, you know, I had this privilege of interviewing an android. Her name was Sofia. And, you know, I learned so much from her. And I know that the people who are developing AI are really, you know, wanting to figure out the multidimensionality of being human, so that these AI devices can be more like that, you know. So I think that that's a very good place. Really, any place that takes those skills you're talking about, And so your own business. And it's interesting, there's a guy that I just interviewed for the delinquency class who was calling me originally because he wanted somebody to help him heal his heart. And he felt he'd had a heartbreak, but he also had a major cardiac issue, you know, so he had the metaphor and he had the reality of it. And so he was looking for somebody who could help him with that. And of course, I thought of heart math, you know, and he already knew all that. So anyway, you know, there are people looking for that kind of thing. And there are ways that I suppose you start by marketing yourself on, you know, different forums where those are the kind of conversations people are having. And so you just let people know that there's somebody like you out there, and you begin to define your own role and your own place. But yeah, you know, IONS always takes volunteers. You know, if I was going to volunteer, I'd volunteer in some place that really had momentum. That's why I say places like LinkedIn. I'm not sure it's that, but you know, a lot of places in Silicon Valley, if that's where you're based, are you know, really open to this. If you go to Google, in their corporate office, they have Maslow's hierarchy sitting on the front desk. So, you know, it's there. They're really into mindfulness. And, you know, I think the coaching also is a good practice. It's something that, you know, you don't have to be licensed to be a coach. So there's not as many obstacles as, you know, being a clinician per se. And that's also a nice thing to have. Those are some ideas.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Yeah, that's a great sort of, Amy, your question is like, where does one begin in the field of transpersonal psychology? That's our first guiding question. It's like, oh, I've finished this degree. I now have a master's degree in transpersonal psychology. Now, what do I do with this? I loved all of Marilyn's suggestions. I think finding who is serving the kind of people that you are looking to serve, having momentum in that they are serving those that population. They are actually already doing some work, and then applying your unique transpersonal perspective to that. You're going to add some unique flavor to anywhere that you're a part of. I think when we heard Marilyn's story, she got a lot of visibility by going around to these places, building those friendships. She went to conferences. I've had the opportunity to go to conferences, had a really great time meeting people. And if you have any sort of, this might not be speaking to you specifically, Amy, but I've felt this, maybe other people have too, this reluctance to introducing yourself and meeting people and trying to making an intentional effort to make friends. That's really important. I think some of that insecurity needs to be stripped off so that you can make those connections and increase that visibility. On social media, it's that same way. You know, you might not feel like, oh, I don't really want to put my face on there. I've had thoughts like that before, a long time ago, working in trying to progress in social media or whatever. But so increasing visibility and working with places that are serving communities that you are looking to serve. I think that's really great answer to that kind of that first leading question. So and sort of the second question too, how does a scholar find opportunities? Where does one search? Well, volunteering, you find that. Marilyn, I'm curious, you had like Deepak Chopra, he's a character to me. He's like an interesting, I don't know what my relationship is like to the idea of Deepak Chopra. You could start at your transpersonal career kissing at the feet of Deepak Chopra. I think that's probably a great place to start. But how did that relationship come about?
I'm willing to do something like that. So I met him.
They do to gurus.
Another serendipitous.
Kiss their feet.
Yeah, no, I'm not into the guru thing. One needs to find the guru in themselves. That's what I do. So I met him. I was at a conference, and it was at an IONS conference actually, and he was the keynote speaker. And the organizer of the conference said, "Oh, Deepak's in the house. And oh, I'll go see if he wants to come to this party that we were having." And I'm like, no way, he's not going to come down here for this. Cut to the next, 5 minutes later, there's Deepak, and he's a super humble, sweet guy. And he comes walking in, and the seas parted and everybody lined up, and he was like, it was like a receiving line for him. And then MA, the woman who was organizing, she introduced me. She said, "Oh, and she's the director of research." And he said, "Research? Really? I'm very interested. I want to learn more." And I said, "Well, that's great. I'd be happy to talk to you sometime." He said, "I have time now. Would you like to talk now?" And meanwhile, there are all these people there, right? And I'm like, "Well, I know you're really busy and you've got a lot of demands on you." And he said, "No, really, let's go talk." And so we went into the middle of what was like a big ballroom, and we sat at this small table and we talked. And I told him about my research, and he wanted me to send him publications. And then finally people started circling because like I was monopolizing Deepak Chopra. I didn't mean to. I never asked to. And I kind of kept thinking, well, but he was asking me and I'm into my research. And so anyway, what happened is I sent him a whole bunch of reprints, and then I never heard back from him. And I'm like, okay, fine. And I think I even did it twice, and I never heard back from him. And then I ran into him at another conference, probably 2 years later. And he's like, "You never sent me those articles." And I said, "Well, I did send them to you, and you never responded." And he said, "Come with me." And he takes me over to his assistant, and he orders her. He's a little, he's a high level Indian male. So he's got that kind of disciplinary style. But anyway, he says to her, I want you to give her my backline number, and I never again want her not to be able to connect to me." And so I had his personal line, and and I ended up becoming good friends with him, and engaging in many, many activities. We did some research together. He published the introduction to my book, Death Makes Life Possible. We co-produced the film together. I have a lot of Deepak stories, but really that was one of those examples where having the research carried me into an orbit that he then wanted to address me instead of me trying to reach him. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So having something that you like, if you're gonna, this is the idea in my mind is like, if you were given $1 million, if you have this awesome opportunity to connect with somebody and build a relationship, are you prepared to have that relationship? Are you prepared to receive that $1 million connection? And maybe with that, it didn't have to be so money centered, but just the fact that you had previously, you had publication, you had a line of work that you could provide, like, look, this is what I have done so far. So publishing is great. Like that was the networking tool for you.
Well, I would say to people, and I want to be able to be open to other people's comments too, because sometimes people, need a minute. But I would say that if, in trying to get going on something, a podcast series, if you want to write a book, know that it's a very competitive world, but the publishers look for how big is your base. And so if you can begin tomorrow, tonight, whatever you're doing later, to build your base and to collect those names and phone numbers and email addresses. And so when somebody asks you how big is your list, my list now is about 5,000, which is not a very big list. I haven't been that active in doing it, but it's good enough. And plus, my other stuff. But podcasts are a great thing to do. Blogs are a great thing to do. And blogs are nice because they're short. They can allow you to begin to polish your voice. You're getting out there. You can begin to use social media marketing to find roads into other communities. So like heart healing, I would go into forums that are, dealing with cardiology stuff, and then find those little veins that are about something beyond, taking medications or getting surgery. There are people looking for alternatives, and then you can pop up there. That kind of stuff. And, having a blog with your picture and, and then you have the social media accounts. So I have about, 15,000 followers on Twitter. I have maximum on Facebook. I have to kind of delete every once in a while because there's people I want to have on there that, there's people who don't follow. So it's good to look and see who's not following you, and then you can delete those. But I think it's figuring out where your passion is. And then, it's that Joseph Campbell thing, follow your bliss. So I think that's the right thing. And I've never been driven by money. Like I said, my first job paid me $400. I had been offered a job in an insurance company right after I graduated, some friend of my mom's, and it was going to pay me like $35,000, $40,000, which was a lot of money for me at that time. And I was like, no. And my poor mom, she was like, what are you doing? She had always told me to learn typing in shorthand so I could be a good secretary. And I was determined I was never going to be anybody's secretary. And to this day on boards, I will not be the secretary just because of some mental thing I have going. But yeah, that might have been a motivation for me too, being told, don't do that. You don't need to go to college. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, and certainly the only person in a big family to have the PhD.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anybody else have any questions? Any thoughts you want to explore?
Don't be shy now.
Please don't be shy.
But blog, I think I was just thinking it would be like, because it's kind of like it's a lot of work to write a blog, because you have to be constant, and then you have to put it out there and make sure that you have people following you and all these things. But I was like thinking, how about if we would make a blog, like a transpersonal blog from the students of the year, or like of different, that would be kind of a cool thing, especially if there would be somebody of like, of how is this institute called, that is the innovation, which you're part of, and Professor Alfers, that somebody would look over it before it gets published, because if it's like something that is partially official, it needs to be good, but it would be kind of cool if not everybody, but maybe some of the students would commit to, like, then you would write maybe like once a month, or like, every 2 months or something, you write your article about a topic that you're interested in, and it gets reviewed, and then it gets published. And then you have like maybe 10, 15 students that do that on a regular basis, and you have a really cool blog about transpersonal psychology, and like, each person has like their own, like, connections, and then Sofia has its connections, and it could be like, anyways, I just thought about these kind of, and plus there's a lot of things that I think we write in classes that I like, really like, I read a lot of things from other students that I think, wow, this is like really, really, really interesting thoughts. And
You are
like,
absolutely right.
Yep.
I think you're so right. And I'm not quite sure why it hasn't gotten off the ground. Although John Elfers, with the new center, as you mentioned, he's very excited about he wants to have a, podcast series, but he's thinking about a little higher production value. I, for years, have advocated for exactly what you're describing. Why don't we, and I think there's a group of students who would really be interested, and I think there's some momentum already around it. So we just have to figure out how to really boost it into the stratosphere without going with Jeff Bezos, or maybe Jeff Bezos comes to us. That's the thought. But anyway, I think you're right. And when I read papers from our students, I am awed by, the richness and the depth. And, I think you're right. Just a little polishing and you'd have a whole set of blogs. So I agree with that, and I would support that. And, I don't know how to get it going exactly. I do know that John is interested, And so maybe, you know, we put a little bit of a fire under him. Nice.
Sounds like some of that is just an extension of a desire to have to have others look at your stuff before you're publishing it to to be permanently out there or something. And journals do this all the time. If you have an idea, you just this is supported by the Association of Transpersonal Psychology. You can become a student member of a variety of journals. And so you can become a student member of that journal, and being a member of the journal, they will, or an association, they will, appreciate you and take the time to look at your idea, what you're wanting to write. They will take the time to edit your stuff, give you some feedback. And you can send that back and forth, 8 times and until it is, we're up to whatever their standard is, and that practice and consistency, just like you were saying, Petra, is really important too.
I think going to conferences. So if you're a member of an organization, figure out 3 organizations that you like. I mean, I really kind of rode one organization at the beginning, and then branched out. I did a lot of speaking stuff for different conferences and stuff. But I do think if you're a member, you can then propose, like the APA. The APA has these massive conferences. And so you propose either an individual contribution, or you propose a panel on transpersonal studies, or, whatever it is. I'm going to propose a panel for WASC, where I'm inviting the faculty, like 4 faculty members, to present on transpersonal pedagogy and what is the transpersonal education. And I think that's a great place to do something like that, because it's a feeder for, in this case, trying to get students to come to Sofia. If people who are the provost or the selections committee chair of, like, for example, I met the guy at San Jose State, and he said he had more applicants than he knew what to do with. And also they had a lot of graduates. And so if they see Sofia as a viable option to send their students to, then that increases, the growth of the school and the growth of the field. But I like what Petra was saying, and I think with John and with the new center, there's a couple other students, and you might just put it out that you're interested in this too, like maybe the Facebook forum, or I don't know where Etzel, she has written a couple of books.
Patel.
Atel. She's written a couple of books, and she's super into this idea of creating a podcast series or a blog series. And I know that she has a lot of, that kind of energy to drive things forward. So just reach out to her maybe, and then let's figure out how to, and I, as a student in the MBA program, I've probably written 30 little short articles for my classes. And many times they ask, because the MBA program is trying to be more transpersonal, some question in the essay will be about transpersonal. And so I've now accumulated a whole bunch of these short little essays that are about the application of transpersonal psychology to marketing, or to decision making, or to leadership. And I'd be happy to participate in something and, post those somewhere. So, and like I said, I think our students are producing really beautiful work. So we should find a way to get that out there.
Yeah. Most definitely. Couldn't agree.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Does anybody have any remaining thoughts, any remaining questions or anything like that?
The other thing I would say is keep connections open. Don't lose connections. I've been in touch recently with Phil Zimbardo, who's, very, very famous psychologist. And I worked with him at Stanford, and, we're friends. Goes back to that friendship thing. And so, I was trying to get him to give a little guest lecture for my delinquency class, but he's having some major health issues right now. So that's probably not going to happen. But I got a bunch of other people, including Travis. Travis came through and gave me a couple of short lectures, and that class
Because
is
I'm a
turning out to be-
delinquent. Because I'm a
Yeah, well, you were the delinquent, and then
I
you
was the delinquent.
transcended.
You could get Phil's daughter maybe to speak for your class.
Oh yeah, you mentioned her to me before.
Zara, her name is Zara, and she did adjunct faculty for the BAC program at the very beginning when I first joined Sofia.
Really?
We did an
Okay.
in-person class with her in the Aikido dojo.
Help me remember that, Travis.
Her name is
Remind me of that.
Zara. I'll remind you.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good idea.
Well, thank you so much, Marilyn. Your contribution to this group and all of your professional wisdom, your trajectory is really an amazing story. It's really awesome to hear. I appreciate it every time I hear it. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if I repeat my story too many times.
No,
like every time I hear it.
I feel like I'm gaining every time I hear it, or it's just locking something in for me personally. So
I'm teasing you. Well, I see your there's people posting like email addresses and stuff. So can you pull that together and we don't lose the threads? See, that's really a big part of the problem. I think people get excited about an idea, and then it takes time, and people don't have the inspiration or the motivation or the telos to manifest. And so I think finding a group and finding 1 or 2 or 3 people who would champion it to make sure it gets off the ground, and then eventually organizations become 50 years old, 100 years old, but it takes a forcing function. So so Travis, I think if you could collect those, and then we can all see where it leads.
Mm-hmm. I certainly will. And once again, I'll plug the Facebook group. We do have a Sofia University students Facebook group. It seems like everybody here is from Sofia, but the Transpersonal Student Community group, that is also, that's meant to be a connection of students across, outside of the political ties to your particular institution. So, just like CIS or Naropa, or we have a couple of students there that were from Aleph Trust. That's a sort of a transpersonal institution in Europe. And we have some of those connections through Stephen Schmitz being a teacher there and things like this. So I'd like to connect the community also outside, just to extend our reach in terms of friendships that we can make. Maybe a student conference, that is something that has been brought up before. I'd love something like that. That's kind of tied in with Petra's idea there with the blog and things. Transpersonal Summit, would be amazing. In 2023, I believe the ATP, the Association of Transpersonal Psychology, I believe we will be hosting a conference in Italy. That is something that is in the works. I was asked to participate in creating that conference. So that's an amazing opportunity. Maybe something you can think about in the future if you would ever like to go to Italy, if that's ever possible. We'll see if that's even possible, hopefully. Things like this would be great. So connecting in the Facebook groups. If you want other people's emails, take those down here. You can feel free to email me anytime at t.gray@sophia.edu. This sort of community building and stuff is what I've been intentional about since I first got here to Sofia in 2013. So I'm happy to bat around ideas as well. And if you don't like me, then you can connect with other people as well. But I'm just kidding. I know you love me.
Okay, well, it's
Thanks,
great
everybody.
being with you all. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
I'm around. You can always email me. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.